Many people are very interested, of course, in Joseph Smith's accounts of the first vision. But besides those, besides the ones that Joseph Smith wrote or dictated or supervised, we also have some people who heard him talk about the first vision and then wrote down an account of what they heard.
Each one of these provides a little different angle, a little personal story of what caught the idea or caught the mind of the recorder. The first one was actually the first of any account of the first vision ever in print. This was done not by Joseph Smith, but by Orson Pratt as a missionary. In Edinburgh, Scotland in 1840, he published a pamphlet which he called An Interesting Account of Several Remarkable Visions. This is a missionary tract in which he begins with Joseph Smith's first vision, as it later became known.
He had heard Joseph Smith talk about the first vision probably on more than one occasion.
There's also some indication that he may have had access as a member of the Quorum of the 12, as somebody fairly close to Joseph Smith, to the 1832 written account, which most people would never have seen.
It sounds different from Joseph Smith's own accounts. It follows the same story, but Orson Pratt is working harder, in a sense. He repeats things, whereas Joseph Smith usually says them once and lets that statement stand for itself.
And so he writes an account which is fairly elaborate. He's doing it as a missionary trying to persuade people. But he captures the essence of the Joseph Smith first vision story and puts it in print for the first time. The second account is an 1842 account, and it's by another member of the Quorum of the 12, this one Orson Hyde, on his way back from dedicating Palestine for the return of the Jews. He stops in Germany and does a bit of missionary work, studies the German language, writes a pamphlet in English, which he translates into German, and he calls it A Cry from the Wilderness.
Here again, it is an attempt to elaborate on things that Joseph Smith usually doesn't feel that he needs to elaborate on, but very interesting to read.
This account would rely probably on the same thing that Orson Pratt did. That is, he heard Joseph Smith personally give this story before, but he also picks up the language in many cases from Pratt's own earlier publication in 1840, which he has a copy of. Now, in 1843, we have two interesting accounts that are recorded by people that heard Joseph Smith tell the story. One of them is by Levi Richards, who is a brother to Willard Richards, Joseph Smith's personal clerk and close associate, and another member of the Quorum of the 12. Levi, on the 11th of June in 1843, hears Joseph Smith in a public meeting give a fairly brief account of the first vision. And he goes home and writes that in his diary that evening.
He emphasized that he received an answer that none of the churches were right, that they were all wrong, and that the everlasting covenant was broken.
Later that same year, there is a newspaper editor by the name of David Nye White, editor of the Pittsburgh Weekly Gazette. He ends up visiting with Joseph Smith in the Mansion House and talking with Joseph Smith and hearing from his own lips an account of the first vision. This was in August, and when he gets home in September, I believe on the 15th of September, he publishes an account of his 2 days in Nauvoo, including the visit with Joseph Smith. It's a fairly extensive account about Nauvoo, about the church, about Joseph Smith, and it includes his notes on the first vision.
I went to the stump where I had stuck my axe when I had quit work. This was something that just occurred to Joseph Smith and that Joseph Smith remembered as he was talking to this interviewer.
And then finally, we have one other diary account that's very interesting by a close associate of Joseph Smith named Alexander Neibaur. He's a German fellow who had come to the U.S. by way of England, and he taught Joseph Smith some German classes. And I'm sure they also talked religion because he had a Jewish background. One day he was at Joseph's home with Edward Bonney, and Joseph told them an account of the first vision, and Alexander wrote it in his diary. So those are the reported accounts that were written immediately after hearing by contemporaries who had an eyewitness account of Joseph Smith telling his first vision.
Whether the account of the first vision is one of the primary accounts from Joseph Smith or whether it's one of the reported accounts from someone who heard him in person describe the experience of that first vision, you can go to the Joseph Smith Papers Project in the Histories series or the Journal series. You can also go to the website
and explore these documents not just on the first vision, but on Joseph Smith and early Latter-day Saint history for yourselves.